Basketball has its sixth man, the unsung hero who comes off the bench to help his team to victory. Football has its 12th man, an unseen but powerful energy that urges the home team forward. Now, Christianity has its 13th apostle, a faithful witness to the love, mercy, and truth of Jesus Christ. How about you? Will you be the 13th apostle?
Now, why are you saying that?
Well, I believe this is your beatitude, the Meek.
I find that interesting.
Yeah, well, we'll explore that. As we always do, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where that thud you just heard was a sandbag dropping on my friend Dan Duddy. I haven't done it in a while.
Double thud. It was the sandbag and me. Yeah.
Yeah,
we'll figure it out.
So we, Dan Duddy and I, Tom Caffrey, will explore the good, the beautiful, and the true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. And we will exhort each other to be the 13th apostle. So, the Beatitudes, part of that outstanding Sermon on the Mount. You know, I think this is something that, well, guys certainly have trouble with. I would say maybe athletic guys, I don't know. Guys who are maybe a little more physical or something like that. I imagine we have the most difficulty with this beatitude, this blessing of Christ. So since it's coming from Christ, we have to work this out. We have to work everything out that Christ says. This is a big one for us, for guys.
Yeah.
Why is it a problem for you?
Well, I can reach back. If you want me to tell you personally why it's a problem to me, it actually carries over to both. Let me tell you what I'm trying to say.
By the way, you notice how I asked that question. Why is it a problem for you?
The problem I'm having with meekness right now is the fact that you want me to explain it.
Well, I have to take...
in sandbag fashion. You didn't even tell me you were turning the microphone on. People don't know that. And all of a sudden, here we are. But
I have to take a sip of this dark frothy cream first. So since I have to do that, you have to explain yourself and the Meek Beatitude.
Yeah, while you sip a Guinness, something wrong with that.
Yes,
that's not very meek of you.
We have to explain that. Oh gosh.
Well,
so why is Meek? Why is this beatitude? Or if all kidding aside, maybe it's not a problem. But I've gotten to know you pretty well.
It is a problem.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging problem. First of all, there's a problem in understanding what it is and not seeing it as a weakness. Meekness is definitely misconstrued oftentimes as a weakness, and even understanding it as not being a weakness, it's really hard sometimes for us as men to not go the route of meekness in some challenging times, and typically when you become face to face with a challenge from another man, or you're in a challenging situation that requires some valiant manhood in your thinking, it's very difficult to go to meekness, which is really gentleness as a like a practical synonym. But as a football coach for so many years, 40 years, and the last say quarter of that, having coordinated the chapter program nationally for the Catholic Athletes for Christ. One of the 7 virtues of the Catholic Athletes for Christ is meekness, and I wrote the curriculum for the Catholic Athletes for Christ, and this was the most difficult one for me to write, because in athletics, which and the kind of push that's required, I'll speak as a man. You can't be anything but gentle in our thinking, to win a football game, for that matter, because it's not that kind of a game. But the gentleness that we need to extract out of this and apply it to the game of football, or apply it to the competitiveness in the business world or in sales or whatever it is that we do as providers for our family. I don't do any of that. That's the difficult part. So I was able to, by much meditation, there's a gentleness in being a teammate. There's a gentleness in stepping aside and inviting your teammates to grow and come with you alongside you, and then actually push them forward and let them grow where perhaps you might otherwise be growing as, say, a football player in that position. And by doing so, in that gentleness, you grow in the virtue of Christ, and you really do grow, exponentially grow as a man by stepping aside and letting others come forward. That's an example of meekness in the spirit of building team. And we build teams in different ways. We build teams in business. We build teams in our family, first and foremost. And I have to practice meekness in my marriage. Here we go, talking about more again. Is learning.
Wait, listen, you've made your quota. It's okay. You made your quota. We should have a gong. So when you say that, I know that you've hit your sales quota, and you're good for the week.
Yes.
Well, wait a minute now. Speaking of more, though. This, when you look at the etymology, the root of this word, this adds a little bit to the disorientation, at least initially. So it says from the late 12th century, gentle or mild of temper, forbearing under injury or annoyance. I like that, forbearing under injury or annoyance. I might hang my hat on that. In addition to humble, unassuming, here comes, of a woman.
What?
So that's what it says. It says gentle or mild of temper, forbearing under injury or annoyance, humble, unassuming, of a woman. Now, shame on you for not having more on as a guest right now, because this would be a critical point for her to interject. But where do you go from there? If you look, this is why a lot of people don't want to dig because of what they might find.
Oh man, you're like
a
digging machine tonight. You're a backhoe operator.
I think that, but we're having fun with that though. We know some women. I'm saying we know some women. There are millions and millions and millions of strong women out there. And, maybe all of them we all have strengths. We have to be, sometimes as men, we can't constantly be the opposite of meek. We can't constantly be bold in everything, charging, ready to fight. Instead of where it says forbearing under injury or annoyance, we're ready to have conflict and maybe defend our honor, defend our ego so often.
Yeah,
that's what I have to do when I have to watch out for that. And you and I were just talking about that in a different context earlier. One of the worst things is if something happens to you publicly. Where it's not just you and another person. And our experience, our what we were discussing earlier was somebody who said something, and it was a reply all. So rather than saying it to me, it was to others in the as well. And so I defended myself, but I had to think about it. I didn't want to, like a reflex, throw a right hook. I'm sorry, right cross, left hook. So I didn't want to do either one. And yet that's sometimes the first reaction for me, and I have to watch out for that because it's wrong, and it's wrong for a number of reasons. Even if from a selfish standpoint, which would not be a humble point, is that it wouldn't help me. Yeah. So I think that we can work through this of a woman from the standpoint of modesty. Again, this definition goes on: soft, pliant, gentle. Those are beautiful things. So when you're humble, you are pliant. You're giving. When I say giving, I mean it's like something with elasticity and something that can yield to it. Because don't forget, if we look at physics, if it's, let's say, elastic or something like that, you'll give, but then you'll come back, and not necessarily, doesn't have to be in a bad way.
Right.
So could we say that Christ, when he was responding to, let's say, the Pharisees,
Mm-hmm.
the worst people, as far as I'm concerned, for him, the hypocrites.
Mm-hmm.
Would we say, obviously, when he was thrashing about in the temple, would we call that meek?
Right.
I wouldn't. So, I mean, it's, blessed are the meek. They might be meek all the time, Dan. The way it's explained is similar to the poor in spirit. And the first four, remember we talked about this, first four are suffering Beatitudes. So are they, where this one, the meek says, remember, forbearing under injury or annoyance. Forbearance, that's one of the virtues.
Yeah.
It's one of our cardinal virtues. So I think that we can go forth, as meek, and maybe at certain times. But one last thing I'll say about that is, if you relate it to, you look at the second part, they will inherit the earth. Well, that, as so many things have in the New Testament, a tie into the Old Testament. And once again, the Psalms, and Jesus knew the Psalms very well. He quoted the Psalms. Their land, it's Psalm 37. It's frequently talking about land, about the earth, that you will inherit the earth. The land will be yours. But what's the land?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people on the planet, and there were a lot of people on the planet at Christ's time. But we talked about this. He only had a certain number of disciples. Right? So if he's got disciples, those are the people who believe in him. Well, who's going to inherit the land? What does the land mean? The land means the kingdom of God. We're going to have a transformation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I also see meekness intertwined with the virtue of moderation, because in meekness it's actually power. Your power gets under control in meekness. So it's not a forfeiture of power. It's really being able to flex your will in situations where you can control the power that you have as a man. Whereas Jesus had the power to flip the tables, and yes, I agree. One of the things that he despised were those that were contradicting themselves. But further on, we as men today on earth, meekness is actually, to me, it's control, and I do believe there are instances where that control must be let go and we need to flip tables. But to me, it's very much intertwined with moderation. And I think in today's time, in 2020, we've heard the term toxic masculinity, and we're seeing so much on TV today that's anything but meekness in our political leaders and so forth. And I'm not talking, I don't want to get into politics, but I'm not. But I'm saying it is, I think it's it's a waning virtue today, because our kids, our children, are seeing anything but it. And it was perhaps Christ's greatest virtue. I mean, he was the most gentle of all. And, he had the battle of defending God's glory, and he ultimately, he put himself on the wood, as we heard last night from Father Mike. He put himself on the cross. But who was more powerful than Christ? And his Christ his power came from and continues to come from the meekness that put him on the cross. So there is great power in the control of your power.
We have to, so we got to explore that word control.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it comes from temperance and moderation. We talked about cardinal virtues. I think, we know we have our umbrella virtues, and I believe it comes from temperance. I think it's synonymous with moderation. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and I think we should then take it in the broader way, as I believe, and that the church teaches what Christ was referring to in this blessing, in this beatitude, that it was for the disciples. It was that there's going to be this big transformation, but it's got to be. It's based on, obviously, like our faith. All our faith is trust in God and taking refuge in Him, giving it all to Him. In some ways, and I know you agree with this. I just wanted to expand on the idea of control. That we are. I mean, we have will, we have reason, so we are to control ourselves. But in terms of the circumstances we face, so often we have no control over them. And we can control our responses to what happens. That doesn't mean that we're still not going to get thrashed about. We're not going to get swamped. But at that time, that's when we get to the point so often when our back is against the wall again. We're going under for the third time. That's when we say, well, here's the last bit of control I have. I'm giving it to you, God. This is my will, and my act of will right now. Maybe the last one is I'm giving this to you, and you're going to determine what happens. That is, I think we'll so often talk about this whole theme of trust in God, and that's a lot of what this is. It's just like the poor in spirit. They get to the point. They're at the point where so many of them are just like the meek. They're at the margins and the peripheries.
Yeah.
In this world, in this life, and Jesus is saying, hang in there. Something bigger is coming down the pike.
I think the practice of meekness, which I'll say accentuating the control factor, where we control our power that we otherwise would have in that situation, or would have exercised if we didn't control it, actually is a virtue that trickles into other areas of our life where control needs to be practiced also. Just simply saying against temptation, for that matter. So I think any form of practice in one area gives us strength in practice of another area. I think also what should be measured or weighed before flexing the virtue of meekness is, what is its intended end? Why are you flexing that virtue of meekness? What will be the positive end that comes from it? In other words, if our Lord did not flip the tables, the end would have been much different than what it was. So He flipped the tables for an intended purpose, an intended end, to show His love for God and the temple. This is no place for this. This is God's temple. And our Lord, as 1 Peter says, 2:23, while being reviled, He did not revile in return. While suffering, He uttered no threats, but kept entrusting Himself to Him, with a capital H, the Father in heaven, who judges righteously. So there is meekness with an incredible end to it. You hear what I'm saying? So I think that's a measure. Letting someone go forth and go forward before you to do something dark and diabolical, that's weakness. That's not meekness. So we have to put a value on the end and the intentions of why you're being so-called meek, generous, forbearing.
Well, somewhere in there you asked a question, and the first thing that came to mind for me was the golden rule.
That's great.
I mean,
that's in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you, and that meekness is associated with humility. Yeah. And of course, with humility, and you and I were talking about this yesterday, the day before. It's not thinking of yourself not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of others more and first. And that's certainly, the humility. It's here's something that came to mind when I was meditating on this and thinking about it. This thought just came into my head. I didn't request it, didn't reach out for it, and it made me think of when I was delivering for a pharmacy summer, right after first year in college. I was delivering for a nearby pharmacy, and I had two areas really. One was a wealthy area, as is so often up on the hill, and they had a beautiful. It was a section of the town, and most of the residents up there had a beautiful view of the New York City, the Manhattan skyline. I mean, it was just gorgeous. You could go up there and maybe on a date and find a certain place. You look out the window and, until the window was fogged up, but you could see the skyline.
Okay.
And so I almost never got a tip up there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And these are wealthy people. Virtually every time, if not every time, I can't remember everyone, it was a long time ago, but when I was in the valley, so to speak, the other side of the tracks, in the tenement buildings, I got tips. I got generous tips, and that's because they walked in my moccasins, so to speak. They had the humility. They have had, and maybe they were living in their eyes a humble life, and they identified with me to a certain extent, whereas the people on the hill there was no way they could identify with me, or no way they would identify with me.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a key word.
I mean, who knows how they were raised, but I hate to think that you go through life, even you're raised a certain way, but if you're in the world enough that you see how. Unless you just don't know what that feeling is like, of meekness, of humility, because you're always on top. I mean, in this case, they're on top of the hill in this town, in the top of their world, however they, they're always on top. So I don't know whether they even ever experienced humility and could define it.
Yeah. It depends on where they've come from to get to where they are. That's the bottom line. And, those that came from being poor in spirit and remaining poor in spirit might look tremendously rich, or they're not rich. They're the great tippers. But there are some really special people. I just met with one today, one of my ex-football players, because he's going to help me, develop some things that you and I have talked about in the area of, discussing these virtues in real life times today in 2020 with people that are struggling with, and what he's struggling with is now that he's a millionaire, that people assume that he's a snob and he's not the same guy that he was, in the muck and the mire, and working so hard. He said, I don't really care about the money, I swear. It's just as people, they make these assumptions about me. So it kind of crosses over to what you just said about the tippers, we can't throw them all into one boat. But I just shed a little bit more light on, to shed a little bit more.
We got about a minute and a half left, buddy.
Gosh darn it! All right, just give me this chance. We don't get excited about movies where Clint Eastwood puts his gun back in his holster and says, "Look, I'm really sorry for shooting all those bullets. Have at me." So we don't live in that culture. The good guy's got to be a tough guy. But I have this great reflection. Maybe we can end on this. How different is meekness? In the way that the Bible teaches us. The Bible celebrates meekness. The biblical worldview says last is first. Giving is receiving. Dying is living. Losing is finding. The least is the greatest. Meekness is a strength. The idea is that we are living God's truth, not by what our culture says should make us happy. And that comes from Christianity.com. And I thought that was a really nice paragraph to share.
Well, I attempted to give a quiz question to our audience, is to look up Numbers 12, chapter 12, verse 3. And it puts the cherry on top of what you just said, Dan, that Moses, he's the leader of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
Got the 10 Commandments, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And yet in that verse, in chapter and verse, you'll see Moses is the meekest man on earth, the meekest person on earth. So,
could you repeat that, the verse again?
It's Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Moses, the meekest person on earth. Anywhere else in there, depending on the version, the interpretation you get, the translation, I should say.
Beautiful.
So,
thanks for sharing.
All right, Danny, we're ripping our way through the Beatitudes, but spend a lot of time in the week between thinking about them, praying about them, and trying to live them. We're going to do that with the next one.
Yep.
Hunger and thirst.
Yeah, I'm looking
All right.
forward to that one. Yeah, that's got power to it. They all do. Stay tuned, everyone, for the Angelus, and stay tuned for your prayer intentions with our friend Peter and Jemmy.
WQPHradio.org. Let them know how much you appreciate what they do. We certainly do.
Amen.
God bless all. God bless you, Danny.
Yeah, God bless you, Tommy. God bless everyone. Love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?